Some forms of pain announce themselves loudly. Others arrive quietly, without a story, without a reason, without a name. Emptiness is one of those feelings. It does not always come from loss, failure, or visible trauma. Sometimes it appears in full daylight, while life looks functional, even successful. People describe it as a hollow space behind the chest, a muted world, a sense that something essential is missing, yet impossible to identify. This kind of emptiness is confusing because it does not ask for sympathy, it asks for understanding. Psychology does not see this emptiness as a flaw. It sees it as a message, subtle, complex, and deeply human, a signal from parts of the mind that learn to stay quiet for survival. This is the psychology of people who feel empty for no clear reason, and the quiet story behind that feeling. This chapter explores how emotional emptiness appears in everyday life, subtle, confusing, and often invisible. It examines the quiet nature of this feeling, how it differs from sadness, and why it can exist even when life seems stable or fine on the surface. Emptiness rarely arrives with drama. It does not knock loudly or demand attention. It settles in quietly, like a dimming of the internal lights, unnoticed at first. People who feel empty often struggle to explain it, even to themselves. There may be no clear sadness, no specific loss, no crisis to point to. Life continues. Work gets done, conversations happen, responsibilities are met. From the outside, everything appears intact, but inside, something feels absent. This absence is not the same as pain. Pain has weight. Pain has direction. Pain can be traced back to a cause. Emptiness is different. It feels flat, muted, distant, as if emotions exist somewhere nearby but behind glass. Moments that should feel meaningful pass without impact. Laughter sounds correct but hollow. Success feels informational rather than satisfying. Connection feels polite instead of alive. This is often the most confusing part, because nothing is obviously wrong. Psychologically, humans are taught to associate emotional struggle with visible distress, crying, anger, anxiety, grief. Emptiness fits none of these categories cleanly. It feels like the absence of feeling rather than the presence of suffering, and because of that, it is easy to dismiss. People tell themselves they're being ungrateful, that others have it worse, that feeling nothing is better than feeling pain. So the emptiness is ignored, normalized, lived with. Over time, it becomes familiar, not comfortable, but known. Many describe it as watching life rather than inhabiting it. Days blur together. Time passes without emotional landmarks. Memories feel distant even when they are recent. This state is not laziness. It is not a lack of ambition. It is not a personality flaw. It is a psychological experience that often develops quietly, gradually, and without conscious awareness. The mind is capable of reducing emotional intensity when it believes full feeling is unsafe, overwhelming, or unnecessary. When this happens repeatedly, emotional range narrows. High highs soften. Low lows flatten. Eventually, neutrality becomes the dominant state. From the outside, this can look like calm. From the inside, it feels like absence. People experiencing this often search for explanations. They change environments, they seek stimulation, they pursue goals, relationships, distractions, hoping something will click. When it does not, confusion turns inward. Questions begin to form. Why does nothing feel fulfilling? Why does motivation feel forced? Why does joy feel theoretical? These questions are not signs of failure. They are signs of awareness beginning to surface. Emptiness is not the lack of depth. It is often the result of depth being held back. In many cases, this hollow feeling exists precisely because the emotional system learned to stay quiet, not because it is broken, but because it adapted. The problem is not that feeling is gone. It is that feeling learned to hide. And because this adaptation often happens early, subtly, and without conscious choice, people grow up believing emptiness is simply who they are: reserved, detached, logical, independent. But emotional emptiness is not an identity, it is an experience, one that deserves curiosity rather than judgment. Recognition is the first quiet shift, not the dramatic kind, just the acknowledgement that numbness is not neutrality and absence is not peace. There is something important hidden inside the quiet hollow, not pain demanding attention, but a story waiting to be understood. This chapter explores the emotional origins of emptiness. It looks at early environments, subtle emotional neglect, and moments when expression was discouraged or unsafe, revealing how emptiness often begins as a quiet form of protection. Emotional emptiness rarely begins in adulthood. It is usually older than the person experiencing it. Not old in memory, but old in pattern. Long before someone notices the hollow feeling, the emotional system has already learned something important, that full expression is not always welcomed, mirrored, or safe. This does not require obvious trauma. There does not need to be abuse, chaos, or cruelty. Sometimes, emptiness forms in environments that appear stable, functional, even loving. What matters is not what happened, but what did not. A child learns who they are through emotional reflection. Joy needs to be seen to feel real. Sadness needs to be acknowledged to feel allowed. Curiosity needs space. Anger needs boundaries, not erasure. When these responses are inconsistent, distracted, or minimized, the child adapts quietly. Not consciously, not dramatically. They learn which emotions receive attention and which disappear into silence. If excitement feels inconvenient, it softens. If sadness feels ignored, it retreats. If anger creates distance, it gets swallowed. Over time, expression narrows. This narrowing is not repression in the dramatic sense, it is calibration. The nervous system adjusts itself to the emotional climate it lives in. In homes where feelings are brushed past rather than explored, children often become emotionally self-sufficient early. They stop reaching outward for resonance. They stop expecting emotional response. This self-sufficiency is often praised. You're so mature. You're so easy. You don't need much. But inside, something important is happening. The child learns that needing less is safer than needing honestly. Emptiness often grows out of this lesson. In other cases, the emotional environment is unpredictable. Affection may be present one moment and absent the next. Validation may depend on performance, behavior, or mood. In these environments, emotional expression becomes risky. Feeling deeply means risking disappointment, so the system learns restraint. Later in life, this restraint no longer feels like a choice. It feels like personality. People describe themselves as detached, rational, low maintenance. They pride themselves on independence, but beneath that independence is often an emotional system that learned not to lean. Not because leaning was wrong, but because it didn't work. Psychology refers to this as emotional neglect, but the word neglect can feel misleading. It suggests intent. Often there was none. Caregivers may have been loving but overwhelmed, present but emotionally unavailable, providing materially but not attuned internally. The absence was subtle enough to be invisible, and because there was no clear harm, the emptiness that follows feels unjustified. People think, nothing bad happened to me, so why do I feel this way? But the emotional system does not measure experiences by severity, it measures by consistency. What was felt, what was mirrored, what was responded to. When emotional needs are consistently unmet, the mind does something intelligent. It lowers the volume. Not to punish, but to preserve. Feeling less becomes a way to need less. Needing less becomes a way to survive. Years later, when life is stable and safe, the volume remains low. Not because danger is present,
but because the system never learned it could rise again. This is why emptiness often feels confusingly disconnected from current reality. There may be love, opportunity, freedom, but the emotional response feels delayed or absent. The emptiness is not about what is missing now, it is about what was missing then. And because the adaptation happened quietly, there is often grief without memory, loss without an object, hunger without an object. This is not a defect, it is evidence of intelligence. The mind protected itself the only way it knew how. Understanding this does not immediately restore feeling, but it changes the relationship with emptiness. What once felt like a personal failure begins to look like a survival pattern. What felt like a void begins to reveal its history. And history, once seen, no longer has to stay silent.
This chapter explains the psychological and neurological mechanisms behind emotional emptiness. It explores how the brain reduces emotional intensity through numbing, dissociation, and affect suppression, and why emptiness is often the cost of long-term emotional self-protection. Emotional emptiness is not just a feeling, it is also a function. Behind the quiet hollow is a nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do. The human brain is designed to prioritize safety over pleasure. When emotional intensity feels overwhelming, unpredictable, or unrewarded, the brain adapts by lowering emotional output. This adaptation is not conscious. It happens beneath awareness, through neural pathways shaped by repetition. Psychology refers to this process as emotional numbing or affect suppression. It is closely related to dissociation, not the dramatic kind often portrayed, but a subtle distancing from inner experience. The brain does not remove emotion entirely, it turns down the signal. This is why people who feel empty are often still functional. They can think clearly, they can analyze situations, they can perform tasks and meet expectations. Cognition remains intact, emotion becomes distant. Neuroscientifically, this involves reduced communication between emotional centers of the brain, like the amygdala and limbic system, and areas responsible for conscious awareness. The feelings still occur, but they are not fully registered. It's like sound playing in another room. This mechanism is especially common in people who learned early that emotions were inconvenient, unsafe, or ineffective. The brain learned that intensity did not lead to relief, so it stopped producing intensity. Over time, this becomes the default state. Importantly, the brain does not differentiate between negative and positive emotions when it numbs. It lowers everything. This is why emptiness often includes the absence of joy, curiosity, desire, and meaning, not just the absence of pain. People often say they feel neutral, but neutrality is misleading. True neutrality feels grounded and present. Emptiness feels distant and flattened. The body is here, the mind is here, but emotional aliveness feels paused. This numbing can become so familiar that it feels normal. Some people only realize something is missing when they observe others reacting emotionally to music, intimacy, achievement, or loss. They notice the difference. Not jealousy, confusion. Why does nothing move me the way it seems to move them? The answer is not a lack of depth or sensitivity, it is often the opposite. Highly sensitive systems are more likely to numb when overwhelmed. When emotions were once too much to process without support, the brain chose reduction over overload. This is why trying to force feeling rarely works. Chasing stimulation through constant activity, intensity, or distraction often fails to resolve emptiness. The system interprets forced intensity as threat, not relief. It tightens further. This is also why people may feel uncomfortable when strong emotions finally surface. Sadness feels foreign, joy feels fragile, connection feels exposing. The nervous system has learned to associate depth with risk. From a psychological perspective, emptiness is not the absence of emotion, it is the presence of inhibition. Emotion is there, it is simply held behind a protective barrier. Understanding this reframes the experience. Emptiness is not proof that something is broken, it is proof that something learned to endure. The brain did what it was supposed to do given the conditions it faced, and while this adaptation may no longer be necessary, it cannot be undone through willpower or self-criticism. Awareness matters because the brain responds to safety, not pressure. When emptiness is met with judgment, the system stays closed. When it is met with curiosity, the system begins to listen. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly. The numbness is not an enemy, it is a message written in the language of survival. And once that language is understood, the silence begins to feel less empty and more intentional. This chapter explores the inner conflict of emotional emptiness, the tension between longing and detachment. It examines the frustration of wanting meaning, connection, or fulfillment without being able to identify what is missing, and how self-blame often grows from this confusion. Emptiness is rarely still. Even when feelings feel absent, something underneath continues to reach. There is often a quiet sense of wanting, not for anything specific, but for something undefined. People describe it as restlessness without direction, boredom that does not lift with stimulation, a sense that life should feel fuller than it does. This creates a unique kind of tension. The mind wants meaning. The emotional system feels disconnected from desire. So wanting exists without an object. This is deeply unsettling. Humans are wired to move toward what they want. When the what is unclear, movement stalls. Energy turns inward. Frustration grows quietly. People try to name the absence. Is it purpose? Is it love? Is it passion? Is it something wrong with the self? Because the emptiness does not explain itself, the mind fills the gap with interpretation. And interpretation often turns into self-blame. Thoughts emerge slowly. Maybe I'm ungrateful. Maybe I'm incapable of deep connection. Maybe I'm just empty by nature. These thoughts feel logical because there is no alternative story. But psychologically, this is a misunderstanding. The absence of felt desire does not mean the absence of desire itself. It means desire does not feel safe enough to surface. Wanting requires vulnerability. It requires hope. It requires the possibility of disappointment. For a system that learned early not to expect emotional fulfillment, wanting becomes dangerous. So the system compromises. It allows wanting to exist only as restlessness, as dissatisfaction without clarity, as hunger without appetite. This is why people may pursue goals that look meaningful but feel empty once achieved. The pursuit is cognitive. The satisfaction requires emotional access. Without that access, achievements register as information rather than fulfillment. The same happens in relationships. Connection may feel pleasant but distant. Intimacy may feel calm but muted. There is closeness without resonance. And because nothing is clearly wrong, people assume they are simply hard to please. But emptiness is not pickiness, it is protective distance. The emotional system learned to keep desire vague so it would not ache. Over time, this creates a split. The mind continues to search for meaning, the emotional system stays guarded. This split can lead to cycles of overthinking, constant analysis of life choices, endless questioning of direction. Why doesn't anything feel right? Because right is not a concept, it is a felt sense. And felt sense cannot emerge where feeling has been restricted. This is often the moment when emptiness becomes most painful. Not because it is intense, but because it feels endless. There is no clear problem to solve, no decision that promises resolution, only a vague sense that life is being lived at a distance. This is where many people begin to believe something is fundamentally missing inside them. But emptiness is not evidence of absence, it is evidence of containment. Desire is not gone, it is unexpressed. Meaning is not lost, it is inaccessible. This distinction matters, because when emptiness is misunderstood, people try to fix themselves. When it is understood, the focus shifts to safety. The system does not need to be forced to want. It needs to feel allowed. This chapter is not about resolution. It is about recognizing the conflict for what it is. A system that longs, but learned not to ask. And beneath that conflict, something important begins to form. The realization that emptiness is not indifference, it is inhibited longing. And longing, even when quiet, means something still cares.
This chapter explores the quiet turning point where emptiness is no longer seen as a defect, but as a signal. It examines how awareness reframes numbness, revealing it as a once necessary adaptation, and how this recognition subtly changes the inner experience. Recognition does not arrive as clarity, it arrives as a pause, a moment where the emptiness is noticed without urgency to fix it, without judgment, without the familiar question of what is wrong. This moment is subtle, but it changes the direction of the experience. For many, it begins with a simple realization: this numbness has a history. Not a dramatic one, not a single event that explains everything, but a pattern that once made sense. When emptiness is understood as an adaptation rather than a flaw, the internal conversation shifts. The harsh interpretations soften, the urgency quiets. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" the question becomes, "What did this protect?" This reframing does not remove the emptiness, but it removes the shame around it. Shame is heavy. It tightens the system. It reinforces the very numbness it criticizes. Recognition loosens that grip. People begin to see how emotional distance once served a purpose, how staying neutral prevented disappointment, how detachment reduced conflict, how self-sufficiency avoided unmet needs. These realizations do not invalidate the pain of emptiness, they contextualize it. The emptiness begins to feel less like a void and more like a scar, not open, not bleeding, but still present. And like all scars, it tells a story. This recognition often brings mixed feelings: relief because there is an explanation, grief because something important was missed. Grief does not always come with tears. Sometimes it comes as heaviness, sometimes as fatigue, sometimes as a quiet ache that has no name. This grief is not about blaming the past, it is about acknowledging reality. Something was needed, something was not consistently met, and the system adapted accordingly. This is the point where resistance often appears. The mind may argue, "Others had it worse. It wasn't that bad. I should be over this." But recognition does not compare experiences. It listens to felt safety. The nervous system does not respond to logic. It responds to felt safety. And for the first time, safety begins to increase, not externally, but internally, because emptiness is no longer being attacked. When numbness is met with curiosity instead of force, the system no longer has to defend itself. This does not mean emotions immediately return. In fact, nothing may seem to change at all, but internally, something has shifted. The emptiness is no longer alone. Awareness is now present with it. This presence matters more than it seems. Psychologically, awareness signals safety. It tells the nervous system that experience can be observed without consequence. Slowly, the brain updates its expectations, not consciously, not quickly, but subtly. People may notice small changes, moments of feeling that last a second longer, emotions that appear briefly before retreating, sensations that feel unfamiliar but not overwhelming. These are not breakthroughs, they are signals, signals that the system is testing whether it is safe to feel again. Recognition is not the end of emptiness, it is the end of misunderstanding it, and misunderstanding is what keeps numbness rigid. Once emptiness is allowed to exist without judgment, it begins to soften, not into joy, not into meaning, but into possibility. And possibility is enough to begin the next shift.
This chapter explores emotional reintegration, not as a dramatic transformation, but as a gradual, delicate process. It focuses on safety, patience, and how feeling returns in subtle ways when the nervous system no longer needs to stay guarded. When emotions begin to return, they rarely announce themselves. They arrive quietly, almost cautiously, as if unsure they are welcome. This is because the system that learned to go numb did so for a reason. It does not reverse that decision quickly. Psychologically, emotional reopening happens in increments, not as a flood, but as a drip. A feeling lasts a little longer than expected. A reaction feels slightly more vivid. A moment carries weight where it once felt neutral. These changes are easy to miss, and just as easy to dismiss. People often expect healing to feel obvious, like relief, like happiness, like resolution. But reintegration feels unfamiliar before it feels good. When emotional range has been limited for a long time, even gentle feelings can feel intense. Sadness may feel heavy. Tenderness may feel exposing. Joy may feel fragile. This can be unsettling. The mind may want to retreat back to numbness, not because numbness was ideal, but because it was predictable. This is where patience matters. The nervous system opens when it senses consistency, not pressure. It needs repeated evidence that feeling does not lead to harm. That evidence comes not from dramatic experiences, but from small, ordinary moments. A song that lingers longer than expected, a conversation that leaves a trace, a memory that stirs something unfamiliar. These moments are not goals, they are signals. They show that emotion is not gone, it is returning in its own time. Importantly, reintegration does not mean becoming overwhelmed. It does not mean losing control. It does not mean being flooded by the past. The system will only allow as much feeling as it believes can be handled. This is why emotional reconnection often feels uneven. Present one day, distant the next. This fluctuation is not regression, it is calibration. The brain is testing boundaries, learning how much is safe. One of the most important shifts during this phase is the change in how emptiness is experienced. It may still be there, but it no longer feels absolute. There are cracks in it, openings. The hollow space begins to feel less like a void and more like a quiet room, one that is slowly being furnished. Meaning does not rush in, it accumulates. And because there is no dramatic moment to point to, people often underestimate what is happening. They may still say, "I feel empty sometimes," but the tone has changed. There is less fear in it, less self-judgment. Emptiness becomes something that comes and goes, rather than something that defines. This is integration, not the removal of numbness, but the expansion of capacity. Feeling does not need to be constant to be real, it only needs to be allowed. Over time, the emotional system learns a new lesson, that expression does not automatically lead to loss, that need does not always go unmet, that presence can exist without danger. This learning happens slowly because it is learned deeply, and that depth is what makes it lasting. There is no final moment where emptiness disappears forever. There is only a gradual shift in relationship, from avoidance to allowance, from judgment to understanding, from silence to quiet response. And in that shift, something essential returns, not dramatically, but steadily, a sense of being here.
This closing chapter reframes emptiness as space rather than absence. It offers a poetic reflection on how the hollow feeling, once understood, can become a container for depth, truth, and quiet aliveness without forcing resolution or certainty. Emptiness changes when it is no longer resisted. What once felt like a void begins to feel like space. And space is not nothing. It is potential. The difference is subtle, but profound. A void suggests something missing that should already be there. Space suggests something waiting. People often fear that emptiness means they are disconnected from life. But emptiness, when understood, often means life was experienced without room to fully arrive. The quiet hollow was not created by a lack of depth. It was created by depth being held back. And what is held back does not disappear. It waits. This is why emptiness can feel strangely heavy despite feeling like nothing. It carries unexpressed emotion, unfelt meaning, unclaimed presence. When the system no longer has to guard against feeling, that space begins to soften. Not all at once, not predictably, but gently. Moments start to land differently, not louder, but deeper, not intense, but real. Meaning does not announce itself, it settles. It appears in ordinary experiences that once passed unnoticed, a quiet morning, a shared silence, a fleeting emotion that lingers just long enough to be felt. These moments do not erase emptiness, they redefine it. The space remains, but it is no longer hollow. It becomes a container, a place where emotion can come and go without being forced, where presence does not need explanation,
where aliveness does not need intensity to be real. This is the quiet resolution psychology offers, not a cure, but a reorientation. Emptiness was never the enemy, it was the shape left by adaptation, and adaptation can evolve. The nervous system is not fixed, it is responsive. When met with understanding, it adjusts. When given patience, it opens. When allowed safety, it remembers how to feel. Not dramatically, not permanently, but honestly. The goal was never to feel full all the time. That is not human. The goal was to feel available, to feel present enough for life to register. And in that presence, meaning finds its way back, quietly. Not as answers, not as certainty, but as a felt sense that something is happening here, that life is being lived from the inside, not watched from a distance. Emptiness, once feared, becomes a reminder, not of what is missing, but of what is possible. And that possibility does not demand action. It asks only for permission to feel, to notice, to be here, quietly.